I arrived earlier than I should have. The sun was still dragging itself over the horizon, spilling pale gold across the plaza in slow, reluctant strokes. Flags hung motionless in the windless morning, stiff like they were holding their breath. The entire courtyard smelled like metal, pressed wool, and fresh polish. Even from a distance, I could taste the sharp tang of brass on the back of my tongue, as if the air itself was warning me to turn around while I still could. I stood across the street for 7 full minutes before I forced myself to cross. Each step felt like trespassing. No one noticed me at first. That was something I had mastered long ago. The art of existing without being seen. You learn a trick or two when people think you are dead. A group of junior officers passed right by me, close enough that one brushed my shoulder. None of them looked at my face. One of them even laughed too loudly at something, the sound ringing against the white stone walls like a broken instrument. Everything felt too clean, too new, too proud of itself, like a world that moved on perfectly fine without me. I kept walking until I reached the outer gate. A checkpoint stood there, neat and orderly, guarded by 2 soldiers who looked barely old enough to remember their own training protocols. One of them held a digital list in his hand, scanning names and IDs of those entering. The other watched the flow of important uniforms and suits with the detached boredom of someone convinced nothing truly unexpected could ever happen on his shift. I stopped a few feet before them. They looked up at me at the same time, like synchronized machines. One of them offered a practiced, polite smile. Ceremony entrance for guests is to your right, Mom. Civilian observers stay behind the cordon. Civilian? The word echoed in my skull like someone had hurled a stone into a well. I wondered what he would do if I corrected him. If I told him I had worn the uniform he idolized before he was even born. If I told him I had marched, bled, starved, killed in that uniform. If I told him I had died in it. Would he salute me then, or would he call security for impersonating a ghost? I said nothing. Silence is heavier than words when you know how to carry it. He mistook it for confusion. Mom, do you have an invitation I can check for you? I turned my head, not to answer him, but to look at the ceremonial stage in the distance. The banner stretched across it in bold navy blue letters, honoring Lieutenant Commander Alexander Dean. There it was, my brother's name, larger than life, larger than mine had ever been allowed to be. Something inside my chest tightened, not quite pain, not quite anger, something older, something I had buried long before they buried me. Soldier followed my gaze. Are you here for the Lieutenant Commander family of honorees? Should have received passes already. I can call an officer to escort, you know. You can step aside. I did not say it, someone else did. The voice cut through the air like a blade through silk. Calm, controlled, terrifying. The kind of voice you did not obey because of rank, but because your instincts told you that not obeying would be a mistake you would not live to repeat. Both soldiers froze, their shoulders straightened instinctively. Their heads snapped toward the source of the voice. I did not need to turn, I already knew who it was. His footsteps were steady, unhurried, certain. Each one seemed to strike the ground in time with my pulse. He came to stand beside me, his presence casting a shadow wider than his body. I could see his reflection in the polished steel of the gate rail, high-ranking uniform, medals that did not belong to televised heroism, symbols that belonged to missions never acknowledged. I had seen him once before in the kind of place where no cameras were allowed and no mistakes were forgiven. He looked at me, I looked back. Then he saluted. It was not a casual greeting, not a respectful nod. It was a perfect textbook salute. Right hand to brow, spine aligned, held without a tremor. It was the kind of salute given only to superiors, to legends, or to ghosts returned from the grave. The 2 young soldiers stared, horrified. One of them actually took a step back. Good morning, Admiral Dean. His voice was steady, loud enough for those nearby to hear, quiet enough that it felt like a private acknowledgement. Every head in a 20-foot radius turned toward us. Some in disbelief, some in recognition, some in fear. I did not react. Reacting would have given them something to cling to. Instead, I held his gaze for a second longer, then nodded once. He dropped his salute. Then he stepped aside, not in deference, in permission. The crowd's whispers began like a distant storm. Did he say Admiral, but who is she? What did he call her again? Dean? Did he say Dean is that Alexander's sister? But she was dead. No one said the word out loud. But I heard it in every gasp, every tremor, every stare. I walked forward. The soldier who had called me civilian earlier scrambled to clear the path. His face flushed with embarrassment. I did not look at him. Shame is a mirror people must hold themselves. As I crossed the threshold of the gate, I felt something strange. Not pride, not triumph, just a quiet confirmation. I was not here to celebrate my brother. I was here to witness the world remembering what it had tried to erase. The plaza parted around me like water around a stone. No one dared to stand in my path now, but they all watched. I could feel their eyes crawling across my coat, my face, my hands, searching for confirmation of the rumors already forming in their heads. Some stared with awe. Some with suspicion. Some with something uglier like betrayal. As if my existence was an inconvenience to the way they had chosen to remember the past. I did not slow. The steps leading up to the stage stretched high and wide in front of me, basking in sunlight as if eager to display their importance. Officers and dignitaries filled the seats arranged in precision rows. My brother sat in the front, center seat of honor, his posture straight, his uniform immaculate. He had always known how to look perfect when people were watching. For a moment, I simply looked at him. From this distance, I could see every polished line of his medals, every calculated tilt of his chin. He wore pride like a tailored suit. The crowd saw a decorated officer, a model of discipline, a national figure. All I saw was a boy who used to cry when storms rattled our windows. He did not notice me at first. He was too busy basking in admiration. Cameras pointed at him. Officers approached to shake his hand. Politicians offered him smiles dipped in honey. I waited. I wanted him to see me without warning, without someone whispering my name in his ear. Admiral Rouse walked slightly behind me, silent but unmistakable. His presence was enough to make even high-ranking officials stand when he passed. I heard one of them murmur to another that is Rousseau from Intelligence Command. Whoever he is escorting must be someone important, someone impossible. We reached the top of the stairs. A senior protocol officer hurried toward us, clearly panicked at the sight of Rousseau arriving unannounced. His eyes flicked between us as he frantically assessed the situation. "Apologies, Admiral, we were not informed of your attendance. Your seat is Al." Rousseau ignored him. "Seat her in the front row." The protocol officer blinked. "Sir, that row is reserved for." He stopped when Rousseau turned his head slightly. No threats, no raised voice, just a calm stare that said, "You know better." The officer swallowed. "Of course, this way." He hurried to guide me, nearly tripping over his own polished shoes. I walked past rows of officers who instantly went rigid in their chairs. Some saluted, some whispered to their neighbors. One woman, a colonel, actually stood as I passed and pressed her fist over her heart in a gesture not taught in any academy. Old-world respect, not protocol. Reverence. I did not acknowledge her. I could not afford to feel that yet. My assigned seat was 2 chairs to the right of my brother. He did not notice until I was standing beside him. He turned casually, prepared to greet another officer or politician. His smile died before it reached his eyes. For one suspended heartbeat, he stared at me without comprehension. Then his pupils widened. His fingers curled slightly against his knee. His breath caught. I saw the exact moment recognition landed. "Reese," he whispered it like a prayer, or a curse, or both. I sat down without looking at him. The protocol officer moved to adjust my chair, as if worried I might not approve of its angle. My brother said my name again, slightly louder this time. "Reese." I kept my gaze forward. If I looked at him now, I might remember things I had no use for anymore. Childhood, laughter, the night I left, the day he chose not to follow. The ceremony began with an overly enthusiastic master of ceremonies introducing political guests and reading their titles like sacred scripture. Applause erupted at all the designated moments, perfectly timed and perfectly hollow. I barely heard any of it. All I could feel was my brother staring at me like I was both miracle and threat. Every few seconds he shifted minutely in his seat, as if trying to convince himself I was truly there, alive, breathing, sitting inches from him. The announcer finally reached his name, Lieutenant Commander Alexander Dean, a man who has shown unmatched dedication, courage, and leadership in service to our nation. More applause, louder this time. Some people stood. Alexander rose to receive it, but his movement was slow, mechanical. His eyes remained fixed on me as he stood. The crowd assumed he was overwhelmed with emotion. In a way, he was. He approached the podium. Cameras flashed. He gripped the sides of the lectern like he needed to anchor himself. "Thank you all," he began. His voice was steady, too steady. He was performing now, falling back on his training. It would take more than my presence to break that. He spoke of duty, of sacrifice, of the honor of serving something greater than oneself. Words I had once spoken myself, words that sounded different now that I knew how easily they could be twisted. There was a moment mid-speech when his voice faltered, just slightly. Most people did not catch it. I did. "Our greatest strength is in those who stand beside us," he said. "Sometimes family. Sometimes those we choose to call family." He paused. "Sometimes those we have lost." Silence. He looked directly at me. Sometimes those who return when we least expect it. A ripple went through the audience. Heads turned toward me like sunflowers following light. I met his gaze, for the first time since I arrived. He waited for something, a nod, a smile, a sign of reconciliation. I gave him nothing. He finished his speech. He returned to his seat. Neither of us spoke. They called his name again for the presentation of the medal. He stood and walked to the center of the stage. A general pinned the honor to his chest. Cameras caught every angle. Applause thundered across the plaza. He accepted the medal. He turned toward the audience. He scanned their faces. Then he looked at me one last time, and in his eyes I saw it, not pride, not relief, not joy, fear. The ceremony ended without incident, at least on the surface. The crowd dispersed in polite waves, filtering into clusters of congratulatory chatter. Hands were shaken, formal smiles were exchanged. Laughter returned, too loud and too brittle, but beneath it all something had shifted. I could feel it in the air, a fracture, a tremor, like the ground beneath them had tilted, but they were pretending not to notice. I did not join the mingling. I stayed seated while others stood, watching them with the detachment of someone observing a memory rather than a moment. People threw glances at me from a safe distance. None dared approach. It was as if I were surrounded by an invisible perimeter. Respect, or fear, they looked the same from where I sat. Alexander was swallowed by a crowd of officers and officials who wanted pieces of him now that he had become a symbol. He played his part well, nodding at the right times, delivering practiced gratitude, but I could see the stiffness in his shoulders, the rigid tension in his jaw. He was performing on autopilot, his mind elsewhere, on me, on the impossibility of me. He kept trying to break away from them, but they tightened around him like vines. They wanted to speak to the hero, not the brother. They did not know that the two were no longer the same person. I rose from my seat and made my way down the steps. People parted again. A few saluted. I ignored them. It was not disrespect. It was honesty. They did not know who I was saluting anymore. At the base of the stairs, Admiral Rouse waited. He stood with the calm patience of someone who had already predicted this moment hours before it happened. He looked at me, not with curiosity or admiration, but with something rarer, recognition. Not of who I had been, but of what I was now. You handled that with more restraint than anticipated, he said. I stared at him for a moment, then replied, restraint is the most effective weapon when people expect violence. He almost smiled. There is a secure room prepared. If you wish to speak with your brother privately, if I wish. He said it like he already knew my answer, like he knew I did not come here for reconciliation. I came for exposure, for presence, for reminder. I walked past him without acknowledging the offer. I could hear his footsteps falling in behind me. He was not escorting me. He was witnessing me. There was a difference. I moved across the plaza, heading toward the outer corridor that led to the operations wing. Not the direction guests were meant to take. A uniformed officer stepped forward to block me, his hand raised in caution. Admiral, that area is restricted, Rouse spoke before I could. She has clearance beyond yours. The officer stepped aside instantly, face flushing. He did not ask for credentials. Even if he had, I would not have shown them. Some authority is not carried in plastic or paper. It is carried in posture, in tone, in history. We entered the operations wing. The atmosphere changed the moment the doors sealed behind us. The noise of celebration vanished, replaced by the low hum of active systems. Screens glowed across the walls, displaying satellite feeds, tactical readouts, encrypted communications. Personnel moved with purpose, speaking in clipped murmurs. All of them wore earpieces. All of them avoided eye contact. They knew. They did not know my story, but they knew my title. They knew my return had not been announced to the public. They knew my presence here was above their pay grade. That was enough. A captain approached hurriedly, eyes sharp. Admiral Dean, Intelligence Command is requesting your input on a developing situation. They say it is time sensitive. I glanced at Rousseau. He gave no sign of surprise. Of course he already knew. He had probably orchestrated the timing to coincide with the ceremony. Nothing in our world was coincidence. I followed the captain through a series of secured checkpoints and into a dimly lit briefing chamber. A circular table dominated the center, surrounded by holographic displays. Lines of data streamed across them faster than the human eye could parse. A commander stood at the display, gesturing to a rapidly expanding red zone on a tactical map. Unauthorized breach detected in the northern defense grid. Tier 3 cyber intrusion. Encryption barrier compromised in 67 seconds. They have accessed relay nodes 30 through 52. Someone cursed under their breath. Another voice asked if it was foreign. They did not know yet. They were scrambling. They were afraid. I listened without expression. The grid they were discussing was one I knew intimately, not because I had used it, but because I had designed it. Not alone, of course. They would never have allowed that. Officially, I had been part of the drafting team. Unofficially, I had built the structure from the inside out. The protocols they were now trying desperately to protect were protocols I had embedded with backdoors they still did not know existed. I stepped closer to the table. They parted to make room for me. The commander paused mid-explanation, his voice faltering as he registered my presence. He glanced at Rousseau as if for confirmation. Rousseau gave him a single nod. "Continue," I said. He did, but his confidence wavered. We attempted lockdown procedures, but the override response triggered a recursive loop. "We are losing access faster than our recovery can stabilize. Show me the breach vector." He tapped a command. Lines of cascading code appeared across the display in a pulsing grid. Red lines indicating compromised nodes. Blue lines indicating defensive patches. There were more red than blue. I stared at it. Then I spoke. "You are not defending against an attack. You are defending against a misdirection. Whoever is doing this is not trying to break your system. They are trying to make you lock it down yourself so they can monitor your reaction speed." A young analyst frowned. "How do you know that?" I turned my head slowly toward him. "Because it is exactly how I built it to respond." Silence. The commander's face went pale. "You wrote this system." I did not answer. "I did not need to." "With your permission, Admiral," the captain said cautiously, "would you assume control?" I placed my hand on the console. And the system recognized me, not by code, not by clearance, but by signature. The breach halted. Every screen in the room froze. A hush fell across the chamber. Every eye turned to me, some wide with awe, some with horror, some with dawning realization that the person they were relying on to save them was the same person who could erase them with a keystroke. I looked at Rousseau. He nodded once. "Proceed." And I did. My fingers moved across the console without hesitation. The interface had changed since I last touched it, but the bones beneath the surface were still mine. They had plastered fresh layers of protocol over it, but Foundation remembers its architect. The system responded like a muscle recognizing familiar command. I initiated a reroute through the dormant nodes, ones they believed were obsolete. They were not. I had embedded silent circuits years ago, invisible to scanners, idle until manually awakened. The grid stuttered for a moment, then realigned under new control. Not theirs, mine. The commander leaned forward, eyes widening as his readouts shifted. Breach levels dropping. Containment stabilizing across all sectors. External signal traced. The attack is being carried from within Allied territory. Someone cursed it again, louder this time. I ignored it. Zoom in on origin point. The map contracted. Lines flickered and reassembled, tightening focus until a red marker pulsed atop a singular facility. A research division under the Strategic Development Council. Internal asset, unauthorized signal. A murmur ran through the room. Sabotage, treason, but I had another interpretation. Someone is probing your reflex. They want to know how fast you can react, what failsafes you trigger, how much access you willingly surrender under pressure. Why would they do that? The analyst asked. So they can measure how dangerous you are before they make a real move. His mouth opened, then closed again. He did not have a response for that. "Alert counterintelligence," the commander ordered. "Lock the facility down." No, every head turned toward me. "If you react forcefully now, they will know how much you saw. They will scatter. They will change methodology. You will lose your only lead." "Then what do you suggest we do?" I stared at the pulsing red dot on the map. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. Letting them think they had gone undetected. But that was not the right message. Power was not in what you prevented. It was in what you allowed. Let them continue. The room erupted in protest. Voices overlapping. Unacceptable risk. Unknown adversary. Breach of command ethics. Rousseau lifted a single hand and silence fell like a hammer. "Admiral Dean," he said calmly, "why let them proceed?" "Because," I replied, "they are not the threat. They are the warning. Whoever they work for believes there is a weakness here. Either they are wrong and testing your defenses, or they are right and your defenses are weaker than you think. And you intend to show them otherwise?" the commander asked. "No," I said, "I intend to show them I am watching." The commander hesitated. Then he exhaled shakily, stepping back from the console. "All personnel stand down. Maintain silent observation. Route all monitoring feeds to Admiral Dean." Acknowledgements echoed around the room. Tension remained, but discipline overrode panic. That was one thing our training had never failed to instill, Obey the highest-ranking voice in the room. In this moment, that voice was mine. I refocused on the breach map, tracking the slow progression of the infiltrator. They were skilled. Their movements were cautious, taking detours through auxiliary maintenance lines rather than core infrastructure. They did not know I had access here. They still thought they were ahead. I traced their approach toward a secondary relay. The target was clear now. Data records. Personnel files, lists of active and inactive clearance holders. They were not stealing information. They were confirming it. They were looking for me. I felt it like a cold pressure under my sternum. Familiar, expected. I had known this would come eventually. Resurrection is not without consequences. When a ghost walks back into the light, something always comes looking for proof. Rousseau studied me silently. He had not moved since we entered. He did not interfere. He did not advise. He simply watched, measuring me as much as I was measuring the breach. They are searching for my access pattern, I said. Yes, we should give them one. Rousseau's eyebrow lifted slightly. Deliberately expose yourself, no, I corrected. Deliberately expose a version of me. Understanding flickered in his eyes. Decoy, I nodded. The analyst spoke hesitantly. Can you create a false clearance trace convincing enough to mislead an intruder of this caliber? No, I said simply. They looked confused. I do not need to mislead them. I only need to interest them. Hands moved across panels as the commander awaited my instruction. What do you need us to do? Open the archive vaults at Tier 6. Every head snapped up. Sir, Tier 6 is sealed under classified lock. No one uses it. Exactly. There will be no legitimate reason for the system to suddenly open it. The intruder will think someone with deep access is digging through old data. They will assume the same thing everyone assumed when I died. You want them to think you are still dead, the analyst whispered. I want them to doubt that I am alive. Confusion rippled, then cleared. They understood. Initiate controlled access. Reroute the breach subroutine through the Tier 6 halls. Wipe any trace that leads back here. The commander hesitated, then nodded. As you command, I heard it, the phrasing, the weight. They were no longer asking for consent. They were following orders. My orders. Alexander's voice echoed briefly in my memory. Sometimes those we have lost. Sometimes those who return. He had no idea what I had returned for. The system flickered as the vault access protocols engaged. The breach signature pivoted, redirecting toward the false trail. The intruder took the bait. Curious. Hunger disguised as caution. They followed the phantom route deeper, believing themselves clever. I traced their line until it disappeared into the oldest sector. A dead end. Let them wander, I said. Do not intercept unless they breach containment. If they attempt extraction, I will handle it. Understood, the commander said. The room began to exhale. Shoulders dropped. Adrenaline receded. They believed the crisis was averted. It was not. It was only beginning. I looked at Rousseau. He returned the gaze evenly. You knew this would happen today, I said quietly. He did not deny it. Why? Because there are moments when a person must re-enter history on their own terms. This ceremony, this breach. You believed both were necessary, he gave the faintest nod. You did not return to honor your brother, he said. You returned to make sure the world remembered you have not forgiven it yet. I stared at the map. At the pulsing red thread still winding through the vault I had built long ago. Forgiveness, I said, is for those who stayed behind. I did not stay. They wanted to usher me into a briefing room to debrief and formalize authority transfer protocols. They wanted reports, clarifications, signatures, confirmations. They wanted to tame the moment into paperwork so they could feel like they understood it. I walked out before any of them could assemble enough courage to stop me. Rousseau followed without speaking. He knew better than to ask questions now. He walked 3 steps behind me, silent as a shadow, not escorting, not guarding, witnessing. The corridor outside the operations wing was nearly empty now. The ceremony attendees had migrated toward the reception hall. Laughter drifted faintly from somewhere beyond the walls. Glassware chimed. Music swelled softly from hidden speakers. Celebration had resumed as if the world had not tilted on its axis minutes earlier. I headed toward the far side of the compound, away from the noise, away from the eyes, toward the private conference suites reserved for confidential discussion between senior officials. The kind of rooms where truth was spoken instead of slogans. The guard posted outside one of the suites straightened sharply when he saw me approach. He opened his mouth to speak, then thought better of it and stepped aside. Good instinct. I entered. The room was dim. Heavy curtains covered the windows. A long table dominated the space, surrounded by leather chairs. One of them was occupied. Alexander. He sat at the far end, hunched forward, elbows on knees, hands clasped tightly together. His ceremonial medal was still pinned to his chest, but it looked absurdly out of place now, like a trophy placed on a battlefield. He lifted his head when he heard the door close. His eyes were bloodshot, as if he had been holding back something all morning. He stared at me for several seconds before speaking. "Tell me it's really you." I did not sit. I stood across from him, arms at my sides, posture relaxed. "I am here." He let out a shaky breath, then he stood. Slowly. Carefully. Like a man approaching a fault line. "They told me you died. You believed them." His jaw clenched. "I saw the report. They showed me the footage. Your unit was declared lost. They said recovery was impossible. They said you died." I finished it for him. He closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them again, something flickered there. Anger, grief, or maybe guilt. Why didn't you tell me? I held his gaze. Why didn't you ask? He flinched, as if I had struck him. He moved toward me cautiously, like he feared I might vanish if he got too close. When he stood within arm's reach, he hesitated. His hand lifted, almost touching my shoulder, then stopped. "If I touch you, will you disappear?" "No." He hovered there a moment longer, then rested his hand on my arm. His fingers trembled, not from fear, from memory. "I didn't know," he whispered. "That is because you never tried to know." He released me as if burned. "That's not fair." Fair. The word tasted bitter. War isn't fair. Abandonment isn't fair. Resurrection certainly is. I turned away from him and walked toward the window. I did not pull back the curtains. No point in pretending sunlight would cleanse anything. He spoke again, voice softer now, more fragile. "I thought I was honoring you. Everything I did, it was for you, to live up to you." I faced him again. He looked smaller than I remembered, not physically. "Spiritually, you lived up to what they told you to be," I said. "You became what they rewarded. They fed you validation and shaped you into their symbol. You were never honoring me, you were conforming to them." His shoulders sagged. He looked at the medal on his chest as if seeing it for the first time. "Is that what you came here to do, tear me down on my own day?" "No." "Then why to remind you this day was never yours?" He stared at me, stunned. "You think you earned this alone?" I asked. "You think standing on that stage erased the fact that I was erased first?" He shook his head. "That's not true." "It is. They buried me, publicly, conveniently. They used my disappearance to fuel their campaigns. Martyr, fallen hero, they invoked my name while silencing my existence. And you let them." His voice broke. "I didn't know how to fight them. You didn't try." Silence thickened between us, heavy, suffocating, necessary. Finally, he lifted his head. There was no pretense left in his expression, only naked desperation. "What do you want from me?" The question hung there, raw and unfiltered. He meant it. He was ready to be told, ready to be commanded, ready to submit if only to be forgiven. I walked back toward him slowly, deliberately. When I stopped in front of him, I spoke clearly, calmly, like delivering an order. "I want nothing from you." He blinked. "I came here for myself, not for you, not for them. I do not need your apology. I do not need your recognition. I do not need your guilt." His voice barely formed. "Then why?" "Because you needed to see me alive." He swallowed. His hands curled into fists, "So that every decision you make from now on is haunted by the knowledge that I am still here." He trembled. Whether with grief or fury, I could not tell. You hate me." "No." His eyes widened. "I do not hate you." I paused. "I simply no longer need you." He recoiled like I had struck him harder than any blow could. I moved past him toward the door. He turned sharply. "Reese, wait." I stopped. But I did not face him. He spoke quietly, voice breaking. "If you don't want forgiveness, if you don't want reconciliation, then what happens now?" I placed my hand on the door. "Now," I said, "now you learn how to live in a world where I am not gone." And I walked out. The hallway outside the conference room felt colder than before. Not in temperature. Temperature was irrelevant to people like me. It was the air. The shift. The way the silence moved. Conversations from nearby rooms did not reach me. Footsteps in the distance seemed to hesitate. Even the lights hummed at a lower pitch, like the building itself was holding its breath. Rousseau was standing where I had left him, 3 paces from the door. His hands were clasped behind his back. His expression betrayed nothing, but his eyes had the faintest sheen of calculation, as if he had been timing how long I would take, as if the exact length of my conversation with Alexander mattered. It did not. He said nothing when I emerged. He simply fell into step beside me as I walked. No questions, no condolences. That was one thing I appreciated about him. He understood the difference between witnessing and intruding. We did not head back toward the operations wing. There was no point. Until the breach evolved further, there was nothing left to solve. We had set the trap. Now we waited. Instead, we walked through a side passage that led toward the east balcony overlooking the parade grounds. It was empty. Most personnel were still cleaning up from the ceremony. Stray ribbons and fragments of confetti clung to the floor like remnants of a celebration no one really owned. I leaned against the railing, looking down at the stage where Alexander had been standing not long ago. Technicians were dismantling the podium. Banners were being rolled up. The medals table had been cleared. The stage looked smaller now, less grand, more ordinary. Rousseau stood beside me in silence. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. Finally, he said quietly, "You could have revealed more to him." I did not move. He did not deserve more, perhaps not. Yet closure is not always about deserving. I glanced at him. "You speak as if closure is something I seek." He turned his head slightly. "You do not want it." "No, then what do you want?" I let the question settle. It was not rhetorical. He was not like the others. He would not ask twice. "I want memory," I said. He waited. "I want them to remember that I am not a story. Not a myth, not a martyr, not a symbol. I want them to know I exist, not in past tense, but in present. And future," he added, "perhaps." He studied me for a moment. Then he exhaled. "The war councils will reconvene tonight. They will try to find the appropriate way to address your return." Address. Yes, not embrace, not celebrate, not explain. Address. Neutral, contained, politically sanitized. They will want to control the narrative, he continued. Some will suggest keeping your return classified. Others will argue to present you as a legend reclaimed. Some, I suspect, will fear you. Good, he looked at me. Fear is cleaner than admiration. I do not need to be loved. I need to be understood. As what is inevitable. His lips tightened, not in disapproval, but something like reluctant agreement. We stood there a while longer, watching the stage vanish. For a moment, I allowed my eyes to slide shut. The sunlight pressed against my eyelids, warm and heavy. I could have almost imagined peace. Then the earpiece in Rousseau's ear crackled. He pressed a finger to it, spoke in low tones, listened. Then his posture shifted. He turned to me. "They took the bait," he said. I opened my eyes fully. The breach, yes. They moved deeper. They triggered a dormant archive command, which won level 12. I paused. Level 12 was not documentation. Level 12 was not data storage. Level 12 was not on any official roster. Level 12 was where they had stored the sealed report of Operation Skyfall, the mission where I had died. Rousseau read the shift in my eyes. "They are trying to uncover what happened to you. They will not find the truth there," I said. "That file is a grave marker. Nothing more." He nodded. "But they don't know that." I turned away from the balcony and began walking. Rousseau followed. "Where are you going to greet them?" He hesitated. "You intend to let them see you not see." Then I stopped and looked at him. "You asked what I want." "Yes, I want them to know that the one they seek has already found them." Understanding flickered in his gaze. Something like anticipation settled in his posture. We reached the secure lift leading down to the lower archives. The guard standing nearby looked up, startled, and immediately moved aside. He did not ask for clearance. He did not speak. The lift doors sealed behind us. The descent was slow, humming through layers of reinforced steel and concrete. I watched the floor indicator blink past restricted level after restricted level. 6, 8, 10, 11, 12. The doors opened. The hallway beyond was dark, not abandoned, active. Silent lights glowed along the floor, guiding the path like a runway. The air smelled faintly of cold metal and disinfectant. Years ago, I had walked this hall under different circumstances. Then, I had been escorted as an operative. Now I walked as something else entirely. At the far end of the hall, a terminal glowed. Its interface was active, unauthorized. They were here not physically, not yet, but projecting their presence through code like fingers pressed against a locked door. Curious, testing, waiting to be acknowledged. Rousseau stood back. He understood this was not his moment. I approached the terminal. The screen pulsed, searching, seeking clearance patterns, hoping to find a trace of the ghost it was chasing. I placed my hand on the interface. The system recognized me instantly. The breach signature jolted. It hesitated, it flickered. And then it responded. For the first time since the breach began, it sent a signal back. A message, one line of text appearing across the screen in silent, taunting clarity. "Who are you?" I stared at it. My reflection glinted in the glass, eyes steady, expression unreadable. I typed 3 words, "I am back." The message lingered on the screen, bright against the darkness. "Who are you? I am back." For a moment there was no response, just silence, digital silence. But silence is never empty, not in warfare, not in code. Silence breathes, it calculates. It shifts weight like a predator deciding whether to lunge or retreat. Rousseau remained several paces behind me watching. He did not ask what was written. He did not need to. His attention was fixed on the terminal like a man studying the first tremor before an earthquake. The system flickered. The breach line, the trail of red tracing the infiltrator's path, wavered, fragmenting for a moment before reforming in a different pattern. Not evasive, not defensive, responsive. A reply appeared. Prove it. A challenge or bait or both. I could have ignored it. I could have severed the connection entirely, forced them out of the system, and sealed every door behind me. That would have been the responsible decision, the safe decision, the decision any rational defense commander would have made, but I was not just defending a system, I was defending a truth. I leaned forward slightly. My fingers rested above the console without typing yet. They want confirmation, I said. Rouso's voice was quiet. Will you give it to them? No. He seemed unsurprised. Then what will you give them a reason to stay? Before he could respond, I input a command, not through standard interface. Through root-level injection, buried beneath public protocol. Only someone who had touched the system's skeleton could do it. Every archive gate in the lower sector unlocked at once. A cascade of status lines flashed across the screen. Tier 12 access granted archive SKYFALL opening lockdown CODES RELEASED Rouso stiffened. Reese, I raised a hand without looking back. I know what I am doing. He hesitated, then fell silent. The infiltrator reacted immediately. Breach lines surged, following the path I had opened. They believed they were being let in. They did not realize they were being led. They flooded toward the Skyfall file, the one stamped with my death certificate, the one sealed with 7 layers of encryption and 3 emergency protocols. They believed they would uncover the truth of how I died. I would show them how I lived. I input a second command, quieter than the first, invisible unless you knew where to look. Phantom protocol, execute. The system obeyed. Within the file, beneath the fabrication, beneath the official report filled with doctored images and propagandist eulogies, something else awoke. A data path that had never been accessed before. Not by them, not by anyone, not since I buried it 7 years ago. The infiltrator followed. Rouse stepped closer now, reading from a distance. You built this contingency, he said quietly. Yes, for this exact scenario, yes. He exhaled slowly. What will they see? They will see what they want, which is a ghost. The screen pulsed again. The intruder no longer typed words. They triggered scans, audio, visual, line after line of probing requests. Identity trace request, facial confirmation, timestamp verification, biosign pattern. I let them try. Each request hit a firewall, not one designed to block, but one designed to reflect. They sent a scan, I sent it back. They sought a pattern, I echoed theirs. They dug deeper, I opened wider. Every question they asked, I answered with a mirror. After 2 minutes of silent duel, the breach signal flickered again. This time, only one word appeared. Impossible. Another blink. You should be dead. I typed. I was. Silence again. Longer this time, heavy, weighty. I could almost feel them on the other side, not as code, but as presence, human or something like it. Someone with breath caught in their lungs. Someone staring at a screen with disbelief, scratching at the edges of logic. They replied. What are you? I considered that. Not who, what. They did not see me as a name, or a rank, or a woman. They saw me as an anomaly, a disruption. A contradiction. Good, I typed, unfinished. The console went dark. Rouse stepped forward. Connection severed. No, I said, not severed. Paused. He studied me. They will return. Yes, will you let them? Yes, he inhaled. Then he asked the one question no one else had asked me yet. Are you afraid? I looked at him. No, he nodded slowly. Not of them, he clarified. Of what you might do next. I turned away from the console and began walking back toward the lift. Fear is for those who believe they might lose, and you do not believe that, no? I stepped into the lift. He followed. Then what do you believe? The doors closed. I believe, I said quietly, that war did not end when I died. It simply paused out of respect. Now it remembers I am alive. The lift ascended. The elevator ascended with a low hum, but I barely heard it. My mind was already ahead of my body, racing through calculations. I didn't bother slowing down. The breach was no longer an intruder. It was an invitation. Someone out there had reached into my grave, not to destroy me, but to confirm whether the ghost was real. I had answered. Now I needed to understand why they asked. When the doors opened, the air outside felt different. The building was unchanged, but the atmosphere no longer belonged to routine. Personnel stood straighter when I passed, not out of respect, but out of uncertainty. They did not know what I was yet. That was good. Ambiguity was more powerful than reputation. I walked past them without acknowledgement. Rouso stayed at my side like a tether I didn't remember tying around my wrist. He knew better than to interrupt, but his presence was a constant reminder that I had stepped back into a world that wanted to define me before I defined myself. The halls were quieter now. Ceremony guests had left or been escorted to private receptions. I had no intention of attending any of them. I needed solitude, not celebration. I moved toward the southeast wing where officer quarters were still maintained for visiting dignitaries. My name was not listed on any registry, but the doors recognized my access. They always would. You do not rewrite the bones of a system without leaving your heartbeat in its circuits. The room that opened to me was sparse. Clean lines, neutral tones. A bed made with surgical precision. A desk aligned perfectly to the wall. No mirrors. Military design was consistent everywhere, sterile to the point of amnesia. A place where identity was supposed to dissolve into uniformity. I did not sit. Instead, I moved to the window and watched the compound courtyard below. Maintenance crews were dismantling the last remnants of the morning's ceremony. Flags being unhooked. Podiums rolled away. The stage where Alexander had stood moments earlier now looked like debris being swept aside. Honor, it seemed, had an expiration date of less than 3 hours. I thought of him, alone in that conference room after I left. I did not regret what I said to him. Regret required attachment, and attachment was a luxury long stripped from me. But I did acknowledge a truth: he had not been prepared for my return. None of them were. That was deliberate. The impact of resurrection relied on surprise. I watched the workers below struggling to fold one of the banners. It was too large for 2 people, so they wrestled with it awkwardly, fabric bulging like an uncooperative sail. They laughed while doing it. They did not care about the name printed across it. It wasn't sacred to them. It was just material weight. That was the nature of legacy. Heavy when hoisted, forgettable when lowered. The sun dipped lower, casting stretched shadows across the courtyard. The light touched the edge of the compound wall and lingered there like it too was waiting for permission to leave. I remained motionless as time softened. My mind drifted back to the message in the terminal. "Who are you? Prove it, you should be dead." I remembered the moment their signal recoiled at my answer. I am back. Were they afraid? Curious? Angry? Or were they like me, searching for a reflection in the dark? A soft chime at the door broke my stillness. I did not turn. The door opened behind me. Footsteps entered cautiously. Not many people would dare enter without knocking first. That narrowed the possibilities. I spoke without facing them. "You should be with your guests." Silence. Then a breath I recognized: Alexander. I kept my eyes on the window. My reflection, barely visible in the glass, showed him standing a few feet behind me, shoulders rigid, hands at his sides like a soldier awaiting judgment. I did not turn. He did not speak. Minutes passed like that, just our breathing. His uneven, mine measured. He was waiting for permission to speak, to ask, to apologize, to beg. I gave him none. Eventually, he broke. "I don't know how to exist around you," he said quietly. I said nothing. "You stand there like stone, like nothing can move you. But I remember when you used to laugh." Still nothing. "I remember when you used to protect me." My grip tightened slightly on the windowsill. He noticed. He took it as encouragement. It was not. "You think I abandoned you." "Maybe I did. Maybe I should have fought harder. Maybe I should have. You should have known me better," I said at last. He exhaled sharply, as if struck. I still didn't face him. "I shouldn't have had to die," I continued, "for you to realize that I lived." Silence again. But this one was different. He wasn't frozen anymore. He was unraveling. I didn't turn to look. I didn't need to. I could hear him swallow the version of himself he had been clinging to. "You're not the sister I remember," he whispered. "No," I replied. "That one was buried." "Then who are you now?" I watched the last banner being dragged off the courtyard floor. "Someone who refuses to stay buried." He didn't respond. When I finally turned, he wasn't standing anymore. He was kneeling, not in worship, not in apology, in surrender. I didn't tell him to rise. I didn't touch him. I simply walked past him and left him there. I did not sleep that night. I did not try to. Sleep was for those seeking recovery. I was not recovering from anything. I was re-entering a world that had continued without me, and I would not let it outrun me again. The compound had a silence at night unlike any other place. Not peaceful silence, suppressed, careful, as if every wall held its breath in case a classified secret might slip through its cracks. Lights remained on in the distance, controlled and dim. Patrols moved on schedule, predictable as clockwork. Predictability was weakness. I wondered if the intruder watching our systems was analyzing these routines as I was. I stood at the window again, watching the faint reflection of my own silhouette against the sleeping base. The night sky stretched above, vast and empty, but I had long abandoned any comfort in the illusion of stars. Space was not peace. Space was distance. I had been buried in that distance once. I had no desire to return. A low vibration hummed against the metal frame beneath my fingertips. Subtle, almost imperceptible, not the usual current of the building. Movement, not footsteps. Wheels, then engines, vehicles approaching the perimeter, too quiet to be ceremonial, too smooth to be standard transport, unscheduled. I turned away from the window and headed for the door. I didn't need a full report to confirm what instinct already knew: something was coming. The corridor outside was empty. Good. Panic would only slow me down. My boots struck the polished floor in controlled rhythm as I moved toward the central monitoring hub. The night shift officers were still alert, but they were relaxed. They did not expect tonight to be different from any other. They would learn. I entered the hub without announcement. Heads turned sharply. No one spoke. They didn't have to. My presence was authorization. "Status," I said. The officer at the main terminal straightened. "Perimeter breach, South Access Road." No forced entry. 3 unmarked transports approaching without transponder signatures. They're moving at controlled speed, not evasive, not aggressive. "Have you hailed them?" "Yes, ma'am," no response. "How far from the gate?" 200 meters. I studied the surveillance feed on the central screen. 3 matte black vehicles rolling in formation. Lights on, not hiding, not charging, presenting themselves. "Any insignia?" I asked. "None visible." Beside me, Rousseau entered the room. I didn't turn to acknowledge him. He already knew I had sensed the same thing he did. "They're not attacking," he said quietly. "No, they're delivering a message. Or making one." The officer looked between us nervously. "Should I send external units to intercept?" "No," I said. He hesitated. Rousseau spoke for clarity. "Stand down, monitor only." The officer swallowed and nodded. "Yes, sir." We watched in silence as the transports approached the checkpoint. The guards there stood ready but disciplined, rifles angled but not raised. They expected a breach. They didn't understand they were witnessing something else entirely. The first vehicle stopped 10 meters from the barrier. The doors opened. No weapons drawn, no flashbangs, no hostile formation. Only one figure stepped out. A woman. She wore no uniform, no identifiable attire, just dark clothing, fitted and functional. Her hair was cropped close to her head. No jewelry. No visible communication device. She stood with her hands at her sides. Calm, deliberate, she didn't look at the guards. She looked directly into the nearest camera, directly at me. Even through the low-resolution feed, I could see her eyes, steady, unblinking, aware. She knew exactly where I was. She lifted one hand, not in surrender, not in greeting, in acknowledgement, not of authority, of equality. The guards hesitated, unsure whether to act. They looked toward the control station, awaiting instruction. "Open the gate," I said. The officer spun in his chair. "Ma'am," I didn't look at him. "Open the gate." He obeyed. The barrier lifted. The air felt heavier, as if the compound itself sensed a boundary being crossed. The woman did not move forward. She waited. For me, I turned and headed for the exit. Rousseau matched my pace. "You're going to meet her alone?" "Yes." "That is unwise." "Yes." "Should I call for escort?" "No." He didn't argue further. As I stepped into the open air, a breeze brushed past me, cool, sharp, carrying the faint scent of metal and ozone. Floodlights bathed the road in sterile white. The vehicles remained idle. The woman stood exactly where she had been, unwavering. I walked toward her, each step measured, unhurried. There was no fear in me. Fear belonged to those who still believed in safety. I had been dead. There was nothing left to fear. When I was 5 meters away, I stopped. She inclined her head slightly. Not a bow, not respect, recognition. She spoke. Her voice was low, calm, not hostile, not friendly. "You really are alive." I did not answer. She exhaled once, almost like a laugh, not of amusement, but disbelief. "They told me you were a myth," she said. "A story, an echo." She took one step closer, her gaze never leaving mine. "I don't want your rank, I don't want your command." Silence settled between us like drawn steel. "I want your war." Her words did not echo. They didn't need to. They settled into the air with the weight of something that had already been decided long before it was spoken. "I want your war, not your help, not your forgiveness, not even your allegiance." She was not here to kneel like my brother. She was here to stand. I did not respond immediately. Response was a concession, and I had not yet determined whether she deserved one. I studied her the way I once studied enemy signatures on thermal scans, tracking movement, posture, micro-expressions. Nothing about her was accidental. She stood as if she had rehearsed this confrontation 1,000 times in her mind and planned for every possible reaction except silence. Her presence was composed but not submissive. Her hands remained visible, not clenched. Her stance was steady, weight equally distributed, neither offensive nor defensive. She was prepared to fight or to speak, but would not initiate either without permission. That, more than anything, told me she operated within strict parameters, not military protocol, personal code. Behind her, the unmarked transports idled in absolute stillness. Their engines emitted no sound beyond a faint vibration. Whoever she had brought with her remained inside. No movement, no anxious shift of bodies, no startled glances, either exceptionally trained or exceptionally loyal. Possibly both. She waited, the night waited with her. I took one step closer, not as acceptance but as evaluation. Her eyes flickered, not in fear but in acknowledgement. We stood 3 meters apart now, close enough to kill, close enough to trust. Both options hovered between us like twin blades. "Who sent you?" I asked, not as curiosity but as verdict. She didn't flinch. "No one." Unacceptable. "I did not come on behalf of an institution," she clarified. "I came as consequence." Vague. Too poetic for someone with this level of precision, a deliberate misdirection. "State your affiliation," I demanded. Her lips curved slightly, not into a smile, but into something like respect for the bluntness. "I have worked under many flags, some still flying, some burned, none owe me now." "Then why come to me?" "You asked for a signal," she said. I answered. "The breach, the intruder in the system, the one who asked, 'Who are you?' You were inside my grid," I said. "Yes." "You tested my reaction time." "I measured your myth against your reality." "And now that you know I exist," I asked, "what is your conclusion?" She inhaled slowly. "I was prepared for legend. I was not prepared for certainty." Her posture shifted, almost imperceptibly, a recalibration. "I did not come to destroy you," she said. "I came to confirm you." The floodlights hummed overhead. Somewhere behind me, distant footsteps halted, probably security unsure whether to intervene. "They didn't matter." "What do you want with my war?" I asked. "War is inevitable," she said. "I intend to choose the correct side this time." I held her stare for several seconds, letting her words settle. Choose, not submit, not request permission, declare allegiance not to me but to conflict itself. This was dangerous. Allies who seek peace are predictable. Allies who seek war are not. "You presume too much," I said. "You pretend too little." Interesting. The floodlights cast her shadow long and straight behind her. Mine reached toward hers but did not touch, a fitting metaphor. "You're asking to fight beside me without knowing why I fight," I said. "I know," she replied calmly. "Only one thing drives the dead when they return." She let the silence breathe before finishing. "Retribution." She wasn't entirely wrong, but she wasn't entirely right either. Retribution is a blade. It cuts sharp but burns fast. My motives were colder, longer, endless. "You think you understand me," I said. She shook her head. "I don't need to. I only need to believe you will not stop." That she did understand. A gust of wind swept past us, tugging at the edges of her clothing but not disturbing her stance. Even the night respected her resolve. For the first time since she arrived, I turned my head slightly toward the transports behind her. "How many follow you?" 112. "All trained, all willing. To fight for me?" "No," she corrected. "To fight with you?" A subtle distinction. Important. I stepped forward one more pace. She did not retreat. "Tell me your name," I said. She answered without hesitation. "Valen." Only one name, no title, no rank, a ghost like me. I considered her. Valen, a stranger who knew exactly what she was doing. A trespasser who had breached my systems, invaded my night, and stood unwavering in the face of judgment. She was either my greatest future liability or my most effective weapon. I reached out my hand, not as acceptance but as test. She did not look at it. She looked at my eyes first. Only then did she extend hers. Our hands met, not in partnership, not in trust, in acknowledgement. Two forces colliding not to merge but to align temporarily. "For now," I said. She nodded once. "For now." I released her. Then turned away, expecting her to follow. If she didn't, I wouldn't look back. If she did, I wouldn't need to. I walked. After 3 seconds, I heard her footsteps beside mine. Not behind, beside. War had found its first soldier. Power does not return quietly. It resettles like a shifting continent, slow to the eye, catastrophic beneath the surface. Walking back through the gates with Valen at my side felt like crossing a boundary that would never close again. The guards stiffened when they saw her but said nothing. They waited for me to label her, threat or asset. I did neither. Ambiguity is armor. Let them wonder which direction the blade pointed. Inside the compound, the night was no longer passive. Lights that had seemed static minutes earlier now felt alert. Voices over distant comms had gained a sharpness they lacked before. Someone, somewhere, had already reported that an unauthorized contingent had entered the base on my command. Protocol would demand escalation. Higher authorities would awaken to intervene. Let them. If the world wished to challenge my reappearance, they would not do so through whispers behind screens. They would have to step in front of me, and I had spent too long in the dark to fear those who lived in the light. Valen walked with deliberate quiet, neither staring nor hiding from those we passed. She carried presence without demanding it. Useful. Those who seek to be feared are loud. Those who truly are rarely need to speak. I led her not back to the officer quarters nor to the main briefing hall. That would be too exposed. Instead, I chose one of the auxiliary command rooms beneath the eastern wing, a room intended for covert coordination during high-risk operations. Most personnel did not even know it existed. I had designed it that way. The security door read my biometrics and opened without hesitation. Valen waited one step behind the threshold, testing whether invitation was required. I entered. She followed without being told. Good. She understood context. The room was rectangular, walls lined with reinforced screens and modular interfaces. No windows, no decoration. A place built for decisions, not comfort. I stood at the central console and activated the internal network. Encrypted feeds flickered alive. Infrastructure, satellite relays, active duty rosters, fleet positions, civil stability reports. Everything I needed to understand the shape of the world I had returned to. Valen did not approach the screens. She stood at the far wall, arms folded, observing me as much as the room. You have maps of everything, she said, not as admiration but as observation. Maps are not the world, I replied. They are just mirrors held by those who wish to claim it. She considered that. Then what do you intend to claim? I didn't answer immediately. I was scanning defense readiness indexes, political shifts, classified threat assessments. Patterns emerged not through data alone, but through absences. What wasn't being reported? What was being suppressed? Whose movements were quieter than they should be? There were fractures spreading across alliances once considered unbreakable. Countries smiling across polished tables while redirecting funds into private security shells. Research labs suddenly restructured under non-government ownership. Arms shipments misrouted under humanitarian cover. None of it surprised me. Corruption was not rot, it was evolution. And yet there was another layer beneath all of this. A different rhythm woven into the larger one. Not decay, design. The breach in the grid had not been an isolated probe. It was part of a pattern. Small disruptions across multiple systems, too subtle to alert command, too precise to be random. Someone was testing not just defenses, but reactions, measuring pulse before inflicting the wound. Someone preparing for war without declaring it. I leaned back from the console, hands resting on its edges. Valen's gaze sharpened. You see it, she said. Yes. And, I glanced at her. Tell me your assessment. She did not hesitate. Someone is building something, not openly, not officially, but consistently. Quiet recruitment, shadow infrastructure, efficient, focused, years in the making. I nodded once. Agreed. She tilted her head. Is it them? Them, the infiltrators, the ones probing through the grid, possibly, but not certainly. I had spent too long in the dark to assume singularity of threat. Shadow networks mirror each other. Predators often move in parallel. It might be a faction, I said, or several, aligning temporarily, loose alliances bound by opportunity, not loyalty. Her eyes narrowed. And you intend to challenge them? I held her gaze. I intend to identify them. And then? Then I decide. She nodded once, accepting that answer without pushing further. That was why she was here, not to direct me. To witness where I pointed, I returned my attention to the console. I need access to all unsanctioned troop movements in the last 18 months. Civilian intel contracts redirected through private shells. Logistics anomalies flagged and dismissed as accounting errors. And I want every officer recently discharged under ambiguous terms. Valen did not question how I intended to obtain that. She simply asked, do you want the data or the people? Both. And the ones who resist giving it. Reveal themselves through their resistance. She gave the slightest smirk, not amusement, but something like respect. Efficient. I straightened from the console. This was the moment most people mistake. They believe war begins with noise, with declarations, with an explosion that shakes the world awake. They are wrong. War begins here, in silence, in rooms where decisions are made without witnesses. In the moment one person decides that peace is no longer useful. Behind me, Valen unfolded her arms. She stood taller, not by choice, instinctively. She felt it too, the air shifting, the future narrowing. The world did not yet know it had been chosen, but it would, soon. Building an army is easy. The world is full of men hungry for orders and women desperate to be seen, but building loyalty, that is different. Loyalty is not bought, it is cultivated. or extracted. I did not intend to form an army in the traditional sense. Armies can be counted, measured, targeted. What I needed was something else. Not soldiers, not followers, instruments. The room's screens cast their light against the metal walls as I worked through the data pull. Valen had not moved from her position along the far wall, but I felt her awareness adjusting to a new purpose. She was not waiting for instruction. She was waiting for a signal that strategy, not survival, was now our objective. The first list populated on the display. Discharged personnel, classified circumstances, last 18 MONTHS. 127 names, not many at first glance, but quantity was irrelevant. Each one had been removed not for failure, but for refusal. I did not need those who were cast out because they broke. I needed those who were pushed out because they would not bend. I began filtering. Officers who refused unethical directives. Specialists reassigned after questioning internal policies. Operatives declared unstable after prolonged deep missions. Every one of them had been erased from formal records swiftly, quietly, a pattern of silence surrounding defiance. Those are the kinds of people who do not forget. Valen stepped forward now, reading over my shoulder. You plan to reassemble them? No, I said. I plan to give them truth. Assembly will be their choice. She tilted her head slightly. Most of them will refuse. Then they are not needed. And the ones who accept. A pause, then, they will not return as who they were. They will come back different. Broken, she said. No, I corrected. Unchained. I archived the list and called up another. Civilian contracts, security diversion, Shell COMPANIS. Thousands of lines. Fronts posing as import firms, logistics providers, humanitarian outreach centers. Structures built to funnel weapons and assets without drawing attention. Government sanctioned beneath layers of false audits. But not all of them bled into corruption. Some had patterns of interference, places where shipments were mysteriously delayed, container seals broken and resealed without removal, incidents dismissed as clerical errors. Those were not accidents. Sabotage from within. Someone inside the corruption pipeline was already resisting alone. I filtered again. Unexplained DISRUPTONS, repeating locations. 4 hubs remained, small, not central, but consistent. Someone or several someones had been quietly disrupting flows of illicit power. They had no banner, no coordination, just stubborn hands altering the tide grain by grain. Valen studied the clusters. These are not soldiers. No, not trained. No, then why bother with them? Because they are already fighting a war no one else sees. She gave a small nod, accepting the logic. I shifted my attention to the third and final tier of data. Unauthorized communication spikes, encryption above civilian grade. This was the most delicate layer. Private messages bouncing through public networks using encryption too advanced for casual use. Hidden clusters of resistance or covert surveillance. Hard to identify without exposing ourselves. I didn't extract them. I instead marked their patterns, letting them remain undisturbed. Someone else was watching too. I intended to let them continue until they chose to step forward or reveal themselves. A network does not need to be summoned, it needs to be recognized. My attention returned to the room. The air felt different now, thicker, expectant. Even without speaking, Valen had shifted her posture into readiness, not aggressive, focused. You will make contact, she said. I will allow them to find me. Her brow lifted slightly. You believe that is faster? Yes, she considered it. And if they choose not to? Then I was wrong about them. She accepted that answer without challenge. Her loyalty was not submission. It was alignment with momentum. If I stopped, she would leave. If I moved, she followed. Good. I stepped back from the console. This was not the moment to celebrate. It was the moment to wait. Power builds not in noise, but in patience. The system logs updated with incoming alerts. Somewhere in the compound, personnel were waking to the report of unauthorized access. They would soon seek me. They would want explanation, justification, control. They would not receive it. The world had spent 7 years deciding who I was without my permission. Now I would let them ask, and I would decide how to answer. Valen stood beside me silent. She looked at the empty screens now darkened to standby. You are not building an army, she said. No, you are summoning an awakening. I looked at her. Let them wake, I said. Those who do not rise were never meant to stand beside me. She nodded once, firmly. Night pressed against the sealed walls like a beast waiting to be named. Somewhere out there, people were still sleeping. By dawn, fewer would. Dawn arrived without announcement. No dramatic light, no sudden warmth, just a slow fading of darkness, the kind that felt more like a warning than a beginning. The compound stirred beneath it. Engines rumbled, radios crackled, doors opened with familiar hydraulic sighs. Routine resumed, but not unchanged. Routine never returns whole after being observed by something greater than it. I had no interest in morning briefings or political pleasantries. Those belonged to people still pretending the world could be controlled through schedules. My day began not in the heart of command, but beyond its reach. I walked past the primary buildings, moving toward the perimeter. No one stopped me. They watched. Some whispered. Some saluted. Some turned away. They were still deciding how to categorize me. Legend, threat, anomaly, and indecision is a kind of reverence. Valen followed, not asking where we were going. She walked like someone who no longer required bearings. That confirmed she had accepted one truth. Proximity to me was direction enough. We exited the compound through the southeast access gate. Beyond it, the land opened into a wide stretch of concrete and faded tarmac, an auxiliary airstrip rarely used except for emergency deployment. Now it stood empty, silent, perfect. This was where the first call would be made, not through broadcasts, not through speeches, through presence. I stepped onto the center of the runway and stopped. The wind was low, carrying dust across the pavement in slow spirals. In the distance, a single maintenance crew paused their vehicle, unsure whether to retreat or witness. They chose the latter. Humans always choose history over duty when the moment is real. Valen stood several paces behind me. No attempt to stand beside me this time. She understood this moment was not hers. I lifted my gaze to the horizon. The sky held that muted silver just before true sunrise, the kind of light that doesn't blind yet, but warns that blindness is coming. I spoke aloud, not for her, not for the observers, not even for the wind. For 7 years, they buried me with honors. My voice carried further than expected, a natural amplification born not of force but of certainty. They said I died for duty. They said I died for unity. They said I died so others would live. Valen remained motionless. The maintenance crew leaned forward, barely breathing. I did not die for them. I let the silence after that statement stretch open like a sudden chasm beneath the world. I died because I obeyed. The wind shifted. A cold current swept across the runway, lifting grit into the air like ash. I obeyed orders designed to conceal truth. I executed missions designed not to protect, but to preserve control. I followed command into darkness so deep they believed I would never find my way back. I looked down the long stretch of cracked runway. They were wrong. The horizon brightened slightly. I am not here to reclaim rank. I am not here to ask forgiveness. I am not here to be restored. My fists curled. I am here to be remembered correctly. In the distance, alarms began to sound, not blaring, not panicked. Low, persistent. The kind triggered when doors opened that should not. It seemed the compound had finally realized I was not where I was expected to be. Good, let them chase. I continued speaking, not to those behind me, but to those beyond hearing. To those removed for questioning, to those exiled for refusing corruption, to those told they were disloyal for loving justice more than order. I lifted my hand, palm open to the sky. I know you, I lowered it slowly, and I am done staying silent so they can stay comfortable. I turned, not to leave, but to face the growing number of figures gathering near the fence line, some in uniform. Some half-dressed from interrupted routines, some simply curious, none daring to speak. Valen finally stepped forward, standing at my side again, not to be seen, but to ensure I would not stand alone. This was not yet an army, not yet a rebellion. This was something more powerful. Attention. The world had been looking elsewhere while shadows built empires. Now the shadow had stepped into the sun. I did not smile. This was not triumph. This was declaration. They didn't approach immediately. People rarely interfere with something they don't understand. They watch, they wait. They hope someone else will be brave or foolish enough to act first. I stood there on the runway, the sun not yet risen but already burning its intention into the sky, and I could feel the fracture forming across the base. Uncertainty moved faster than orders. Soldiers whispered without speaking. Officers communicated through glances alone. Radios stayed silent longer than they should, as if afraid to call attention to themselves. Valen remained poised beside me, her presence both anchor and warning. She didn't look at the crowd, she didn't acknowledge them. She looked outward past them as if expecting movement beyond the visible horizon. She was right to. Movement came, not from the personnel gathered near the fence, but from the main access road. A column of vehicles approached, not sirens, not lights, but precision, official enough to command authority, subdued enough to signal caution. Command had arrived. The vehicles stopped 30 meters away. Doors opened. No one stepped out at first. Protocol dictated caution. They were waiting to see if I would retreat, if I would explain myself. If I still played by their rules, I did nothing. Finally, one door shut with more force than required, someone gathering confidence through sound rather than conviction. A man in a high-collared, formal uniform stepped forward, mid-40s, polished, rigid, a career built on order rather than action. His posture said he believed himself in control. His eyes said he wasn't entirely certain. He stopped 10 meters away, too far for conversation, close enough for hierarchy. "Admiral Dean," he called. His tone was clear but cautious. "This area is restricted." I didn't move. He exhaled once through his nose, recalibrating. "We were told you were off duty." "I am," I said. He blinked, thrown by the answer. Off-duty personnel did not stand in open airstrips before dawn declaring war on memory. He gathered himself again. "Then you must be aware your presence is causing disruption." "Good." Another flicker in his eyes. He hadn't expected defiance without volume. Most rebels shout. It comforts command to believe resistance comes with noise. Silence makes them nervous. He shifted tactics. "If you wish to speak to command, there are channels." "I am not speaking to command." The murmurs behind the fence grew quieter. He glanced at them, irritated by the audience. "You are creating confusion." "Then clarify it," I said. He stiffened. "This is not the appropriate location for. This location is appropriate because I am standing here." He opened his mouth to argue, then hesitated. He was beginning to understand. He could not remove me without force. He could not threaten me without risk. He could not ignore me without consequence. He defaulted to protocol. "I have been instructed to escort you to central briefing." "No." He waited for an explanation. I didn't give one. His jaw tightened. "You are refusing command." "I am refusing bureaucracy." He glanced at Valen for the first time. She didn't acknowledge him. She watched him the way one watches a storm, waiting to see if it grows teeth. He tried again. "Admiral, standing here will not change. Everything has already changed." Silence. The sun finally crested the horizon behind him, bleeding gold across the tarmac. The light washed over his face. He squinted, momentarily blinded. I didn't look away. He lowered his gaze. Slowly, carefully, not in submission but in realization. He knew this was not a request. This was not disruption. This was transition. He turned to his convoy, gave a silent gesture. They did not advance. They withdrew, not retreating, repositioning. They were not ready to confront me. They were going to find someone who believed they could. Valen exhaled softly beside me. Not relief, not approval, recognition. "You drew them out," she said. "No," I replied. "I woke them." I looked toward the horizon where the sun now burned in full. "And now they will decide whether to rise or burn." The sun had fully risen by the time they returned for me, not with soldiers this time, but with precision. Power rarely repeats its mistakes. When intimidation fails, it does not escalate to violence. It escalates to diplomacy. 3 vehicles approached in a disciplined row. No banners this time, no flashing insignia. Authority that doesn't announce itself is far more dangerous than authority that does. They stopped at the same line as before. Doors opened. Not a formation, a procession. 4 individuals stepped down, not soldiers, not guards, political. 2 men in tailored uniforms with badges polished to legal clarity. 1 woman in a black suit, her every movement measured to broadcast restraint rather than threat. And at the center, the one they hoped I would respect. Elder, not by age but by posture. Not military, not political, institutional. A face I didn't recognize, yet one that had probably signed operations I had executed in silence. The kind of person who never appears in documentaries but decides which wars get remembered. They did not walk toward me as a group. They advanced staggered like predators approaching a beast they wished to tame rather than startle. They stopped 5 meters away. The suited woman stepped forward first. She was calm, not confident, practiced. "Admiral Dean," she said, her voice smooth, careful not to betray judgment. "We are representatives of Central Oversight. We've come to discuss your reemergence." I didn't respond. She continued. "Your return, while unexpected, presents an opportunity for reconciliation, for reintegration, for stability." Words built to sound generous, designed to be mistaken for respect. I remained silent. The elder stepped forward then. No theatrics, no clear rank. His authority was implied, not worn. "Reestein," he said, "not admiral, not commander, my name, my whole name, spoken not as greeting nor accusation, observation. You are alive." I met his gaze. He had not spoken a question. He had spoken a problem. He clasped his hands behind his back. The world believed you dead. That belief shaped policy, strategy, public morale. Your sudden reappearance has consequences. Still not asking anything, simply laying foundations, preparing his offer like a surgeon preparing a table, stainless, impersonal. You were a symbol once, he continued, of loyalty, of sacrifice. He paused. You can be that again. There it was, not request, recruitment, not into service, into silence. He gestured slightly toward the compound behind him. Return to us, on our terms, appear publicly. Let us control the narrative. We will restore your rank, provide you with voice, platform, resources. I could almost admire the strategy. They offered power without freedom, visibility without truth, a stage with a script already written. And if I refuse, I asked, the woman in the suit answered before he did. Then fear will replace admiration, and whatever legacy you once had will fracture. Not a threat, a promise. The elder watched me for a long moment. You must understand, the world is not ready for you. He waited. That was when I realized they were not here to stop me. They were here to delay me. Slow me down long enough for bigger forces to decide what to do. They believed themselves patient hunters. They didn't understand I had not returned to be hunted. I had returned to burn the forest. I looked at them not with defiance, not with rage, with clarity. I will not be managed. The woman drew breath, ready to counter. I continued before she could. You mistake my return as an event to contain. I took one step closer. It is a verdict. The elder's expression shifted for the first time, not fear, recognition of something inevitable. I turned away from them, not dismissing, concluding, your window for influence is closed. They didn't call after me. They didn't follow. They simply stood there, understanding too late that they had not arrived to negotiate. They had arrived to witness. Revelation. I did not return to the compound. I walked past it. Valen followed without a word. The delegation of officials remained frozen where I left them, still calculating how to respond without realizing that calculation itself was already obsolescence. They would not catch up, not because they lacked speed, but because they lacked conviction. The eastern perimeter opened onto an unfinished sector, a place once intended for expansion but long abandoned, left to dust and half-poured foundations. No cameras, no guard rotations, a blind spot carved by neglect, now repurposed by fate. It was quiet here, not empty, expectant. I stopped in the center of the skeletal construction zone. Concrete platforms lay exposed beneath morning light, glinting like bones under fleshless skin. This place had been forgotten. That made it sacred. Valen stood beside me, her silence sharper than any blade. You're ready, she said. She wasn't asking. I nodded once. She turned her head slightly. Do you need me to stand back? No, she stayed. I knelt and pressed my palm to the cold ground. It recognized me, not metaphorically. Literally. Deep beneath this forgotten zone lay one of my earliest works, a dormant protocol built into the infrastructure before my death. A failsafe I had buried so deep no one else even knew to look for it. Not a weapon, a beacon, not of light, of truth, I whispered its name. Phantom Protocol, rise. The ground did not shake, the air did not crackle, there was no spectacle, instead, quiet awakening. Screens across the nation flickered, not every screen, only the ones built to suppress, private terminals in secured bunkers, classified archives, internal servers sealed behind 10 layers of access. Every vault where history had been rewritten, every file that had been doctored to hide the cost of power, all of it unlocked, not for the public, for the forgotten, those discharged, those discredited, those silenced. They didn't receive slogans, they received proof, scanned orders signed in sealed rooms, covert missions buried under false causes, lists of names declared dead who were never given graves, including mine. The world did not yet know, but they did, the ones I had called without speaking. The ones already waiting for a signal. Now they had one, not a command, an answer. They would move, some in rage, some in purpose, some in silence, but they would move. I stood again. Valen was still beside me. She watched the sky where no aircraft had yet risen but soon would. This is the beginning, she said. No, I replied. This is the line. A pause. From here, the world must choose. She turned to me. And those who don't choose, I looked toward the brightening horizon. They will be chosen for. The wind lifted, fierce now, as if breathing for the first time. Behind us, alarms began to sound across the compound. Not confusion, movement, not panic. Realization. I did not look back. Resurrection was not my story. Consequence was, and it had begun.